"Give me the rifle." The words came out flat, not a request. Sergeant First Class Damon Price had both hands pressed against the wound in his side and was looking up at her with eyes that were completely clear, which was the worst sign. Shock hadn't hit yet. Pain hadn't hit yet. What had hit was the math, and the math was this. 42 insurgents moving up the eastern slope, one compromised Overwatch position, and a woman whose job title said Fleet Logistics Specialist, standing over a Barrett M107. She had fired exactly once in a training context, 9 months ago, in the Nevada high desert, on a Tuesday afternoon when the biggest threat was sunburn. She picked up the rifle. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit subscribe and follow this story to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this one travels. Vivienne Hayward had a system for chaos. Most people who knew her would have said the opposite, that she had a system for order, for precision, for the meticulous architecture of numbers that kept a naval air station supply chain from collapsing under its own weight. But the truth, which Vivienne understood about herself and rarely said out loud, was that order was just her preferred method for managing what was always, underneath, a controlled form of chaos. Numbers were chaos you could name. Inventory was chaos you could count. A balance sheet that didn't reconcile was chaos with an address. She was 31 years old, and she had been doing this for 8 years, and she was very, very good at it. Her official designation was Logistics Management Specialist, GS-12, assigned to Naval Air Station Fallon, Nevada, the Navy's premier tactical air warfare training center, a place where the sky was filled on any given day with aircraft performing maneuvers that cost more per hour than she earned in a month. Her job was to ensure that every component required to keep those aircraft in the air existed in the right quantity at the right location at the right time. It was, in its own way, a form of precision targeting. The target was efficiency. The weapon was mathematics. She had not planned to become good with a different kind of weapon. That was not something she had planned at all. Chief Warrant Officer Damon Price had noticed Hayward 6 months after she arrived at Fallon, which was 6 months longer than it usually took him to notice things worth noticing. He was 53 years old, which is a remarkable age to still be active in any capacity related to special operations. And he was remarkable in several ways that the official record reflected only partially. 30 years of service, 3 conflicts, a collection of commendations that he kept in a box in his quarters because framing them struck him as a form of nostalgia he didn't trust. What he noticed about Hayward was not her work, though he'd noticed that too. The supply chain efficiency metrics had improved 12% in her first quarter, which in the logistics world was the equivalent of a sniper grouping his shots inside a quarter at 500 meters. What caught his attention was something she was doing at the rifle range on the base's western perimeter on a Wednesday afternoon when she had no reason to be there professionally. She was watching, not shooting, not waiting for a lane. Watching. Specifically, she was watching a young petty officer work through a qualification course at 300 meters, and her eyes, Price clocked this specifically, were not on the petty officer. They were on the target, and they were making small adjustments, micro-corrections, the kind of involuntary computation that a trained spotter does automatically when observing another shooter. She was reading the wind by the grass movement at the berm's edge. She was noting the shooter's trigger discipline. She was doing all of this without knowing she was doing it, which was the part that told Price everything. He walked over and stood beside her. "You see the issue?" he said. She didn't look at him. He's rushing the exhale, shooting at the top of the breath instead of the natural pause at the bottom. Price said nothing for a moment. The petty officer fired again. The shot went low and right. "His support elbow is also floating," Hayward said, "about half an inch too high. It's introducing a lateral inconsistency." Price looked at her. "What's your background?" She turned then. She registered his rank and adjusted her posture automatically, the reflex of 8 years of federal service. Logistics, Chief Warrant Officer, supply chain, inventory systems. Before that, a pause. "My grandfather was a competitive shooter," she said. "Long-range precision. I used to go to his matches. Used to, he passed when I was 19. Price looked at the range. The petty officer fired again, still low and right. "You still shoot?" When I can find range time, she paused, which is infrequently. Price reached into his shirt pocket and produced a small worn range card, the kind that got soft at the edges from years of handling. He handed it to her without explanation. On the back of it, in handwriting that was precise and economical, was a time, 053, and a location on the base's secondary range complex. Show up if you want, he said. I don't need you to. She looked at the card and then at him. What is this for? Depends on you, he said, and walked away. She was there at 0520. Price arrived at 0530 exactly and said nothing about the gap. He simply set up the bench with the specific and unhurried efficiency of a man who has been doing something long enough that the preparation is as automatic as breathing, and he put a rifle on the bench that was not the standard issue she had last qualified on, and he said, "Tell me what you see." She looked at the rifle the way she looked at a new inventory system, scanning for the architecture, the logic, the internal relationships between components. She named the platform, the scope model, the likely caliber from the barrel profile. She identified 2 modifications that suggested the owner had specific preferences about trigger weight and cheek weld geometry. She did all of this in approximately 45 seconds, and when she stopped, Price was looking at her with an expression she would later recognize as the specific satisfaction of a man who has found exactly what he was looking for and is managing not to show it too obviously. "Pick it up," he said. She shot badly that first morning. She knew it while it was happening, which Price told her later was the critical thing. Not the accuracy which would come, but the self-awareness, which either existed or didn't, and could not be manufactured by instruction. She was analyzing her own errors in real time, which meant she had the architecture for learning already in place. All Price had to do was give her the data. The data was what she needed. She was, at her foundation, a person who organized information and extracted patterns from it, and ballistic science, the physics of a projectile moving through air, the mathematics of environmental variables, the geometry of position and hold, was information with a very clear pattern once you understood the underlying logic. Wind drift was not mysterious, it was a calculation. Bullet drop was not intuition. It was physics applied correctly or incorrectly, and the target told you which. She was back on Thursday, and the following Tuesday, and every session after that for the next 4 months. Price ran her through a progression that she would only understand in retrospect was not casual instruction, but systematic preparation. Platform familiarization, then environmental reading, then position discipline, then extended range work at distances that the standard qualification course didn't approach. He taught her to call her own shots, to observe the trace, read the impact, make corrections without waiting for external feedback. The most dangerous assumption in this business, he told her one evening, when the sun was going down behind the mountains to the west and painting the Nevada desert in colors that seemed excessive, is that someone else is going to give you the information you need. Sometimes they will, often they won't. You have to be able to build the full picture yourself. She thought about this in terms she understood. In supply chain management, the most critical failure mode was dependency, a system that couldn't function when one data source went offline. Redundancy was the answer. Internal verification, the capacity to reconstruct the full picture from partial inputs. "You're describing data integrity protocols," she said. Price looked at her. "I'm describing survival," he said, "but I'll take the analogy." He introduced stress protocols in month 3. Physical stress first, shooting immediately after sustained exertion, the heart rate elevated, and the breath ragged, and the fundamental challenge of overriding the body's urgency with the mind's discipline. Then cognitive stress, complex scenarios with time constraints and incomplete information, the kind that required her to make decisions before she had everything she needed, which was, Price told her, the only kind of decision that actually mattered. A decision made with complete information, he said, is just a calculation. The thing that separates good operators from everyone else is the quality of decisions made with 30% of the data they'd prefer to have. She got better, session by session, in the specific and unglamorous way that genuine competence accumulates, not through sudden breakthroughs, though those happened too, but through the patient repetition of fundamentals until the fundamentals became automatic, and the automatic became reliable. Chief Petty Officer Renata Solis, who ran the base's secondary range and who had watched this entire process with the particular attention of a woman who had been in Naval Special Operations support for 16 years and had seen a great many things that surprised her, and very few that astonished her, said to Price on a Thursday afternoon in month 4, "What exactly are you building over there, Damon?" Price didn't answer. But the following Monday, he handed Hayward a training schedule that extended 8 weeks beyond what she had expected and contained, in its third week, an annotation that read, "Extended range work, 800 meters plus." She stared at the page for a moment. "Chief Warrant Officer? Yes, I'm a logistics specialist. I don't have an operational role." "Correct. So why?" "Because," Price said, with the patience of a man who has answered the same version of this question many times, "competence doesn't care what your job title says it should be. And because I've been doing this for 30 years, and in 30 years you develop a sense for when someone is standing in the wrong place." He looked at her steadily. "Not wrong the way they're useless where they are. Wrong the way a tool is wrong when it's doing a lesser job than it was made to do." She sat with that for a long time. The 800-meter work nearly broke her, not the shooting. She had developed enough foundation that the mechanics, while demanding at extended range, were within her capacity to address systematically. What nearly broke her was the wind reading. At 800 meters, a 2-mile-per-hour error in wind estimation produced a miss that looked like a fundamental technique failure until you traced it back to the initial calculation. The variables multiplied, the margin for error compressed, the mathematics became less forgiving in ways that were intellectually beautiful and practically terrifying. She missed. A lot. She recorded every miss in a small notebook she had started keeping. Distance, conditions, estimated hold, actual impact, delta between intention and result. The notebook filled up faster than she expected. She found that useful. The notebook was honest in the way that targets were honest. It showed her exactly where her understanding was incomplete, which was the only productive relationship with failure she knew how to have. One afternoon in week 6 of the extended work, she put down the rifle after a particularly difficult session and said, without preamble, "Do you ever miss?" Price was behind her, making notes on his own pad. "Everybody misses," he said. She stopped. She was asking something more specific, and she wasn't sure how to frame it. "You're asking if I've ever held," Price said quietly, "and if holding was wrong." She didn't answer, which was an answer. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of something that had been set down very carefully from a great height. "Once," he said, "Iraq, 2007. I had a confirmed hostile in my scope at 400 meters. Civilian vehicle moving through the engagement zone on a route we declared clear. I held because the shot path ran directly through that vehicle's line." A pause. "The vehicle wasn't civilian. It was part of the ambush. 3 of my teammates were wounded before we could relocate." He set his pen down. "I've gone through the decision 1,000 times. With what I knew at the moment, I made the defensible call. With what I learned afterward," he stopped. "That's the weight I carry. Not the shots I took, the one I didn't." Hayward looked at the target downrange. It was very still. The wind had dropped. "Does carrying it make you better or worse?" she asked. "It makes me honest," Price said, "which is the only thing that actually helps." She thought about that the entire drive back to her quarters. She thought about it during the inventory reconciliation she worked on that evening. And she thought about it when she called her mother in Albuquerque on Sunday. And her mother asked if she was doing anything interesting. And she said the standard things, the comfortable distance things, because some things don't translate well across 700 miles of satellite connection. She was in the middle of a quarterly supply audit 7 weeks later, when a man she had never seen walked into her office with the deliberate and unannounced confidence of someone who has spent enough time in operational environments that knocking on doors has started to seem like an abstract courtesy. He was not in uniform. He had the look of someone who had worn uniform for a long time and was wearing civilian clothes the way a former athlete wears regular shoes, technically appropriate, slightly unconvincing. His name was Commander William Ashby, and Price had apparently told him about her, which Price had not mentioned. "I'll keep this brief," Ashby said, sitting down without being invited, which she cataloged without comment. We have a problem. We have a logistical assessment problem, specifically. I have a team going into an environment next Thursday that contains a significant weapons and equipment cache. Intelligence assessment puts it at 30 to 40 caches, networked, multiple storage points across a 4-kilometer area. I need someone on that assessment who can read what they're looking at in real time and give me actionable data within 20 minutes of breach. She looked at him. You want a logistics specialist in the field? I want the logistics specialist, Ashby said. Price has been specific about the distinction. Your supply chain anomaly analysis for the last 8 months has been tracking a weapons distribution network that my intelligence people believe connects directly to this cache system. You know what you're looking for in a way that a visiting analyst doesn't. He paused. You'd be assigned to direct Overwatch. You stay within 20 meters of your protection element. You assess, you transmit, you extract. I'm a civilian federal employee, she said. I don't go outside the wire. You would, on this operation, under specific authority and with full protection element. He looked at her with the direct, undecorated attention of a man who had made his assessment and was stating it rather than selling it. I'm asking, not ordering. There's a distinction. She heard Price in that distinction. She was almost certain he had used those exact words. She asked the one question that mattered. Is Price briefed? Price requested the operation, Ashby said. You're the variable he was planning around. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, I need 48 hours. Ashby stood. You have 24, he said, not unkindly. The timeline doesn't bend. He moved toward the door and then turned back, with the look of someone who had almost forgotten something they hadn't actually forgotten. The cache network. If it's what the intelligence suggests, your shipment pattern analysis from March was correct. The numbers you flagged weren't accounting errors. He paused. They were procurement patterns for a sustained campaign. She looked at the inventory screen in front of her. The numbers were all still there, exactly where she'd put them, perfectly honest. I know, she said. He left. She opened the supply anomaly file she had built over 8 months. 347 flagged transactions, 17 distribution nodes, a pattern that looked like legitimate procurement corruption until you mapped it geographically and the geography started forming corridors. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went to find Price. He was at the range, which was where he always was when he wasn't somewhere else. He was cleaning a rifle with the methodical and unhurried attention of a man who considers the maintenance of a precision instrument a form of respect. He didn't look up when she came in. You could have told me, she said. Yes, he said. Why didn't you? He set down the cleaning rod. Because the moment you know you're training for a specific operation, you start training for that operation instead of training for competence. They look the same from the outside. They're completely different on the inside. He looked at her. You needed to be competent, not operationally prepared for one specific scenario. There's a difference. She thought about that. Ashby says you plan the operation around me. I plan the operation around the data, Price said. You are the person who can read the data in the field. Those aren't the same thing either. He paused. I'll ask you once directly because you deserve a direct question. Are you in? She looked at the rifle he had set down. She thought about the notebook she had filled with misses and corrections. She thought about 800 meters and crosswind variables and the way Price had described his held shot in 2007. Not with guilt, exactly, but with the specific and permanent weight of honest accounting. I'm in, she said. He nodded once. Then come to the armory. Solis has your kit. Her kit included things she had expected: body armor, communication equipment, medical supplies, and one thing she had not expected, which was sitting in a case at the end of the bench when she walked in, and which Solis was standing beside with an expression she had never seen on Solis before. Not the professional competence, not the measured approval of recent months, something that looked very much like concern. The M107 case. Hayward stared at it. That's not part of a logistics assessment kit. No, Price said. It's not. He opened the case. The team's primary Overwatch element is carrying the same platform. Standard configuration, which you know. He didn't gesture toward the case. He didn't need to. I'm not telling you that something is going to happen to that element. I'm telling you that in 30 years, I have never gone into a situation that went precisely as planned, and I have survived 30 years because I stopped being surprised by that fact and started preparing for it. He looked at her directly. You know this system. You know it at ranges that matter. If the situation changes, and it may not, and I genuinely hope it doesn't, I need you to be capable of making a decision and executing on it. She looked at the rifle. And if I freeze? It was an honest question. She asked it the way she would ask an honest question about a logistics system, not catastrophizing, not minimizing, just naming the actual risk. You won't, Price said. You can't know that. I know your data, he said simply. I've been watching you build it for 8 months. The question isn't whether you'll freeze. The question is whether you'll let the situation be what it is instead of what you expected it to be. A pause. That's the only thing I can't train into someone. You either have it or you don't. He looked at her steadily. You have it. She put on the body armor. She picked up her kit, and at the end of the bench, she closed the M107 case and lifted it herself. And nobody made any comment about that, which told her more than any comment could have. The flight in was 2 hours, and most of it was silence of a specific kind. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but the silence of people who had already said everything that needed saying and were now in the period where saying things was no longer useful and doing things had not yet begun. Price was across from her. He caught her eye once and gave her a single nod that contained, as far as she could read it, everything from the data is right to you're ready to I'm here. All in one small economical movement, because Damon Price did not waste communication any more than he wasted ammunition. The objective was a compound network in a mountain valley, and from the moment she stepped off the helicopter and her boots hit the rocky ground and the cold hit her face, dry and thin and very different from Nevada desert cold, colder in a way that felt intentional, she understood 2 things she had not fully understood before. The first was that the intelligence was right. She could see the storage geometry from the first building's exterior, the deliberate engineering of the cache network, the weight distribution patterns of doors that opened in particular ways. She was reading it the way she read a supply manifest. The numbers were all there. The second thing she understood was that something was wrong. The radio traffic changed tone. Not words she could track, but cadence, frequency, urgency. She had learned that language in the supply chain the way a convoy commander's voice shifted when the route report changed. She heard it now and her spine registered it before her brain processed it. Then, a burst of fire from the ridge above the northern approach. Then a voice on the net. Overwatch is down. Repeat, Overwatch is down. She didn't decide to move, she moved. Price was 40 meters up the slope in a shallow depression that gave him a clean sight line across 2 approach corridors. He was on his side. His left hand was pressed against his neck, not the wound you died from instantly, but the kind that gave you a clock. He looked at her with eyes that were very clear. The rifle, he said. His voice was level. Get it up, North Ridge. There are 2 of them establishing a support position at 350. If they get that gun set up, I know, she said. Vivienne. He said her name the way he rarely said it, directly, with the specific weight of someone who understands what they're asking. Can you make this shot? She looked at the rifle. She looked at the ridge. She looked at Price, who was looking at her with the absolute and unambiguous certainty of a man who has made a calculation and is asking her to confirm the variable. Her hands were not shaking. Yes, she said. She picked up the M107. The stock settled against her shoulder with a familiarity that 8 months of sessions had built into something deeper than memory, into geometry, into the specific language of a precision instrument she had learned to read rather than fight. She acquired the North Ridge through the scope. The sight picture resolved. 2 figures, equipment recognizable, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. Price's voice, quiet beside her, wind, 4 miles per hour, northeast. Range, 340. You've got the angle. The decision took 2 seconds. The first shot took 3. The support position never got established. What came after that, the next 22 minutes, she would describe later with the same language she used for inventory reconciliation. Clear, sequential, factual. This is what I observed. This is what I calculated. This is what I did. This is what resulted. She would not minimize and she would not amplify. She fired 7 times. 6 achieved their intended effect. 1 missed because a moving target direction at the exact moment of trigger break, and she corrected on the follow-through and did not spend time on the miss because the situation could not afford the time. She stalled the flanking approach from the east long enough for the team's secondary element to reposition. She called 3 targets from the scope without prompting, distances, and positions because she had learned to think like a spotter as well as a shooter, and the 2 capacities were, at this level, the same capacity. And somewhere in the middle of minute 14, with her eye pressed to the scope and her breath in the specific controlled rhythm that Price had spent months calibrating, she became aware that her face was wet. She did not know when that had started. She didn't stop. She kept working. At minute 22, helicopter rotors announced themselves from the south. 2 attack birds, already cleared hot. The flanking elements broke. The compound was secured. The radio said all clear in the voice of a man who said it carefully, like he meant to check that it was true. She was still in position. She didn't move immediately. She cleared the rifle and set the safety and lay in the cold mountain air and looked at the sky, which was very large and very dark and scattered with more stars than the Nevada desert ever showed, and which was completely indifferent to everything that had just happened beneath it. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Kimura, the team's medical element, appeared beside her in the way that good medics appear. Announced just enough that she heard him coming, quiet enough that he didn't arrive as a shock. He crouched and looked at her with the specific inventory of a man who is assessing things that don't show on the outside. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. "Status?" She thought about what an honest answer looked like. "Functional," she said. "Ask me again in an hour." Kimura sat down beside her, which she hadn't expected, and didn't see anything for a moment. Just sat. The simple and uncomplicated presence of another person in the dark, which was in that moment exactly the right thing and the only right thing. "You did something tonight," he said finally. "I know what I did," she said. "Yeah," he said. "That's the part that matters. Some people go a long time without knowing." He paused. "Price is stable. The neck wound missed the subclavian by don't tell me the margin," she said. A pause. "Okay," Kimura said. "Is he talking?" "He's arguing about his own medical assessment, which is a positive indicator." She almost made a sound that was close to a laugh. "That sounds right," she said. She went to see Price in the medical bay after the debrief, which was long and conducted by people with careful eyes who wanted everything, and asked their questions with the focused urgency of individuals for whom information was the resource that mattered most. She gave them everything. Cash assessment first, then tactical sequence, then shot data, then decision process. Precise, sequential, complete. She did not editorialize. She stated what she had observed, calculated, decided, and what had resulted. Price was propped up in the bay with his head at an angle that suggested the neck wound was more complicated than he was acknowledging. And his expression when she walked in was the first completely unguarded thing she had ever seen on his face. "Shot data," he said immediately. She almost said seriously. She didn't, because she understood it. The mission was the mission. The numbers were the numbers. She gave him the assessment. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and his face did the thing it rarely did, the unmediated thing, the thing that lived underneath the professional composure. 7 shots, he said. 6 confirmed. 1 miss with immediate correction. "The wind shifted on contact," she said. "I accounted for it on the follow-through." "I know," he said. "I watched the trace." A pause. "You called your own targets after the 3rd shot." "Your radio went out," she said. "I had the angle and the sight picture. It was the available data." He looked at her for a long moment. "You did exactly what I trained you to do," he said. "And you did it in conditions I didn't design and couldn't control. That's the distinction that matters." He paused. "That's not training anymore. That's capability." She sat down in the chair beside his bed without asking. He didn't say anything about it. "There's going to be a conversation," she said. "About what comes next. Ashby will have it with you." "I know." She looked at her hands. "I'm not sure what I want the answer to be." Price said nothing, which meant he was listening completely. She had learned the distinction. "I'm a logistics specialist," she said. I'm good at it. I built something here, the supply chain analysis, the anomaly tracking. The work I did that identified this cash network in the first place. That work matters. Yes, Price said. And tonight happened, she said. Yes. And both of those things are true simultaneously. Yes, Price said. That's generally how it works. He shifted slightly, winced without making a production of it. The question isn't which one is real. They're both real. The question is which one you choose to prioritize and whether the choice is actually yours or whether you're making it because someone else's framing made one option feel inevitable. She looked at him. Is one of those options inevitable? He met her eyes. I'm not going to tell you what to choose, he said. I never ordered you to the range. I never ordered you to stay. I opened a door. Everything you did past that door, you did. He paused. Whatever you decide now, that's yours too. The same way the shots tonight are yours. Not because I handed you a rifle, because you made the decisions. Ashby's conversation happened the following morning in a small room with a window that looked at a helicopter pad, and Ashby was direct about it in the way that was apparently his fundamental nature. I'll give you the full picture, he said, not the edited version. You've earned the full picture. He set a folder on the table. Your cash assessment was the most complete field evaluation we've received from a non-tactical element in this theater. Your anomaly analysis from the last 8 months connects directly to a network we've been trying to map for 14 months. And your operational performance last night. He stopped, started again. I've worked with designated precision marksmen for 15 years. What you did on that ridge in those conditions, with the information you had, I've seen trained snipers fold in easier situations. She didn't say anything. Here's what I'm offering, he said. Option 1. You go back to Fallon. The logistics work continues. This operation is documented as an extraordinary circumstance. You're recognized appropriately and you return to doing a job you're excellent at, and that genuinely matters. He paused. Option 2. I submit a formal recommendation for your inclusion in an interagency precision fires program. It's not sniper school, you're not military, the pathway is different. But the program exists, it has precedent, and the operational record from last night makes your candidacy more than defensible. He folded his hands. I'll tell you honestly, I want you in option 2, not for sentimental reasons, because competence at this level is rare, and I have spent 15 years watching it go unrecognized because someone's job title didn't match their actual capability. He looked at her. But it's your decision, and I mean that without any pressure attached to it. She looked at the folder on the table. She thought about the notebook she had kept. 300 pages of misses and corrections and wind readings and hold adjustments. She thought about Price saying, the weight I carry is the one I didn't take. She thought about Kimura sitting beside her on the mountain without saying anything. Which was exactly right. She thought about 9 minutes of radio silence while she worked alone on that ridge with no confirmation and no feedback, and no external authority to tell her whether what she was doing was right. She had not needed any of those things. She had read the wind and called her own distances and made 5 decisions in 22 minutes that she would carry for the rest of her life. She already knew the answer. She had known it since the rifle came up in her hands and the sight picture resolved, and she understood, in the specific and quiet way that genuine self-knowledge arrives, that she was doing the things she was most completely herself while doing. I need to make one call first, she said. She called her mother in Albuquerque, and the call was long and not easy, and full of pauses that weren't bad connections, but were her mother sitting with things that were large and true and required real time to hold properly. Her mother had known her grandfather, had watched him teach Vivienne to read a range card at age 9, had heard something in Vivienne's voice for 8 months that she hadn't been able to name. You sound like yourself, her mother said finally, the way you sounded when your grandfather was alive and you were doing the thing he was teaching you. Vivienne sat with that for a moment. Yeah, she said. Okay, her mother said. The same syllable that contains, in certain voices, an entire philosophy about accepting things that are large and real and cannot be made smaller by wishing. Then go do it right. The program's approval took 3 weeks. The formal notification arrived on a Thursday morning while Vivienne was running a discrepancy analysis on a fuel requisition that didn't reconcile because the supply chain did not pause for personal milestones, and she did not expect it to. Price came to her office. He never did that. He knocked, which was also unusual. She looked up and saw the paper in his hand. She read it twice. Then she looked up at him. His face was doing the thing she had first seen on the helicopter pad the morning after the operation, the settled thing. The thing that looked like a man who has been carrying a long question and has finally received an answer complete enough to put the question down. "Congratulations," he said, not inflated, just accurate. "Thank you," she said, "for the invitation. You showed up for the door," he said. "Everything past it was you." He turned to go. She said his name, not his title, his name, and he turned back. "On the mountain," she said, "when I picked up the rifle. I want you to know that I wasn't thinking about the training. I wasn't thinking about the range time or the sessions or any of it." She paused. "I was just reading the wind, like you taught me." Price looked at her for a long moment. His voice, when he spoke, had the particular quality of something said once, precisely, by a man who means exactly the words he is using and not one word more. "That," he said, "is the whole point." She looked down at the paper in her hands. The numbers were all there, clean and exact, the way numbers always are. She had been reading numbers her whole life. Inventory counts, supply manifests, ballistic variables, the patient mathematics of wind and distance and hold. She had always been very good at it. She closed the file on her screen. She stood up. She picked up the notebook from the corner of her desk, soft at the edges now, its first half in Price's handwriting, and its second half in hers, an 8-month record of everything that had been built, shot by shot, session by session, miss by correction by hit. She opened it to the last blank page. She wrote the date, and below it, "Approved. Ready." She put the notebook in her bag next to the range card that was still soft from years of other hands, and she went to work.